What's going on, everybody? Today I wanted to talk about the 1031 exchange, one of the many investment strategies to use if you are a real estate investor. Now, once again, not a financial expert. I don't work for the IRS because this is a IRS code. That's where 1031 even comes from. It's part of the Internal Revenue Service as far as their tax codes. This is just essentially me giving information on a particular strategy you could use if you want to defer the capital gains whenever you're selling an investment property. So that's essentially what a 1031 is for. You want to be able to have an investment property that you're using as a rental, and you want to sell it, but you don't want to recognize any of the capital gains, which is on average about 20%. So in order to do this, there is something called a 1031 exchange, where you take the net proceeds of the property in question that you're selling, take those proceeds and give it to what's called an intermediary, which is essentially a 1031 exchange company which holds the liquid cash for you, which in this context is called cash boot. And the thing is that you cannot hold on to any of the cash when you're selling a property, when you're trying to do a 1031 exchange to defer the capital gains, because if you touch the funds, then the 1031 is basically disqualified, essentially. So that's one thing to keep in mind when it comes to a 1031 exchange. You want to be able to hire an intermediary to hold the funds for you, so that way you can go locate your next property to use in order to make the 1031 exchange work. And on that note, when it comes to the 1031 exchange, it is only used for investment property purposes only. You cannot use a 1031 exchange to do a fix and flip or get your own personal property or things of that nature. It is solely used for investment purposes only. Even though fix and flipping is technically considered investments or an investment property strategy, we're talking about the sole context of using properties as a rental to obtain cash flow. Now, a couple things to keep in mind when it comes to a 1031 exchange is, like I said, you have to reinvest all of the net proceeds from the property that you sold into the next property. So here's another thing to keep in mind. You have to acquire a property with the same or greater value than the previous property you had just had. So if you had a property that was valued at $250,000, you want to acquire a property that's the same value or more, say a property that's $400,000. So here's another thing to keep in mind. You have 45 days to actually locate the replacement property for the 1031 exchange. And then there's another time frame to keep in mind. You have 180 days to actually close on the whole process of the 1031 exchange property, the property that you are replacing. Excuse me. Here's another thing to keep in mind when it comes to the 1031 exchange. There is a 3-property rule which, sorry about that, y'all, which allows you to be able to have 3 properties as potential replacements for your sold property, no matter what their value is. And then another thing to keep in mind, but they all have to be, within the context of being equal or greater value than the property that you're replacing. And then another thing too to keep in mind is that there's something called a 200% rule, which allows 4 or more properties as long as their total value does not exceed 200% of the value of your sold asset. So you can get up to 4 properties as a replacement as long as it doesn't exceed 200% of the value of your sold asset. And here's another thing to keep in mind too. You want to be able to report your exchange to the IRS before the year is over. So when you do your 1031 exchange, you definitely want to be able to report that exchange to the IRS. And another thing too is that all of this that I just explained has to be in writing. And like I also said, you have to have a qualified intermediary, which is the company which will hold the net proceeds from the property that you sold, so that you do not touch those funds, because if you touch those funds and use that money for something like a yacht or a vacation, then your 1031 exchange process will be disqualified. So that's the thing about the 1031 exchange. You want to defer capital gains, the recognized capital gains, which is, on average about 20%. The 1031 exchange is used solely for investment properties, not fix and flips, not your own personal property. And, you have 45 days to actually find the replacement property, and you have 180 days to close on the investment property. And then there's 3 property rule, which, allows for 3 properties as potential replacements. And actually, it doesn't matter even what the value of the properties are, but they should not exceed, or they should not be under the value of the property that you had sold. And then don't forget the 200% rule, which allows for 4 or more properties to be used as a replacement, as long as their total value does not exceed 200% of the property that you had replaced. And with that being said, this is Bradley Core of eXp Realty signing out. And if you need to buy or sell a property here in Pensacola, Florida, Gulf Breeze, Florida, or Milton, Florida anytime soon in the near future, give me a call at 850-525-1686 or email me at bradley.core@exprealty.com. Take it easy, y'all.